my allegiance. To this country that's acting like they don't want me, I guess I'm leaving. Take me to a third world country, bet I survive it. Cause out here, I could be shot dead while I'm jogging or vibing up in the crib and catch a hot one like Botham. And even if they pick up them charges, they'll probably drop them. They claiming they protecting the city, guess we in Gotham and I'm a black man. Riding with my bro, they think we robbing. And they gonna pull me over and slowly approach the car with the button off the holster, and I'm supposed to be calm. Got me feeling like even when I'm right, I'm wrong. I guess they left me no rights but to bear these arms. I know the preacher want to share these psalms, and I believe him. I just think right now at the time, my imam said it's peace if you believe in Islam. I could find war in the Bible and the Quran. So how long we gonna wait before we ring the alarm and start purging all the perverts and the racists along with the pedophiles and shoot the rapists and the rats instead of just shooting Hispanics and shooting blacks? For years, we've been raising the volume about this violence, trying to turn it louder than that white coat of silence. You see that hate that we reading all in the comments? You see what I see and that thing don't leave you astonished? I know they hate it when I rap this way, but guess what? We ain't friends if you ain't feeling the same. Can you relate? When you see that blood spill in the streets, and it's the same as that black blood that's still in your veins, you don't get it. You the reason we in defeat. It's been a pandemic, they sending us 6 feet. Before the Great Recession, they ruined our Wall Street. Before they killed Martin in Memphis, this thing was bleak. Before they locked Meek for William in the street, my brother Tariq had a case in Philly he had to beat. He had a firearm and ain't present no harm. Never had a felony and ain't commit no crime. In the city, you better have it for when things go wrong or have somebody else trying to tell what happened to mom. On social media, they saying, I can't believe he's gone. This ain't a meme, and I can't keep calm. I can't breathe, and I ain't do no wrong. I had my hands on the wheel, you still shot in the car. I'm Philando Castile. I work at the school. When did I become a threat to you? I was walking home, it was raining, I had my hoodie on. This white boy pressed up on me, he had a weapon on. My name's Trayvon. Yeah, I might have been high. Y'all writing tickets for that now. Why I gotta die? If my killing's justified, then why y'all gotta lie? Why the rule you do for me for Dylan Roof don't apply? Huh? May Allah be pleased. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair to our brother Jamal Williams, Rise Rashid, for that wonderful piece, that spoken word about what it means to be a black man in America. I think it captures a lot of the emotion that people are feeling. And a lot of us watching today, we have, alhamdulillah, 48 people on this live stream. We are immigrants. We don't understand this. We might have experiences of what it feels like back in Palestine, in South Africa. I'm from South Africa myself, and I grew up through apartheid. I remember stories growing up of people talking about their too dark teachers getting thrown out of windows because they were just not fitting in with the times. But we don't understand what it's actually like to be a black man in America and what it's like to not be able to walk down the street with a hoodie on, or to sit in a front yard with a toy gun, or even to sit in our houses right now during quarantine and not be afraid for our own safety and our own lives. And I think that piece just captures a lot of that emotion very well and helps us understand and contextualize what we see on the news so much better. Now, I'd like to turn it over to all our panelists, inshallah. So I'm going to have Imam Oliver from the Islamic Center, as well as Imam Salahuddin from the Islamic Center as well. Both are wonderful members of our community that I believe some of them started in New York, some of them started down south here in Raleigh, and they do a lot of work both with our community and especially with the incarcerated community in helping to bring justice and to bring Islam into the prison system. As tragic as what happens in the prison system is, there's a great book actually by the title of The New Jim Crow, where mass incarceration is this new epidemic that's preventing people from coming back onto the streets and providing for their families eloquently. Alhamdulillah, our two imams, Imam Oliver, Imam Salahuddin, are working within the prison system to help spread Islam. And as a result of their work and the work of other wonderful scholars and dawah giving outreach folks, Islam is the fastest growing religion within the prison system. So subhanAllah for that. We also have Brother Musa Ramzi. He is an Islamic scholar right here from the Islamic Association of Raleigh. And then we're also going to have our brother Raz Rashid is going to join us. He's going to take a seat right here. Pull up a chair. And we're just going to have all of our panelists talk together and share some of their thoughts on what this means to be a Black man in America, what it means to be Black in America, and some steps that we can go through. And then inshallah, we'll have Imam AbuTaleb to discuss some of the religious pieces of this. We began our statements, Islamic Association of Raleigh statement on this matter, talking about how in the farewell khutbah, the last sermon Muhammad gave, he mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us all from Adam. It is all from dust. And he did not make us different. No Black has rights over a non-Black. No Arab has rights over a non-Arab. We are all equal in the eyes of God. And there's actually a verse, I believe it's Surah Al-Ma'idah, where it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us into nations and tribes that we might be able to better know one another. That our differences should not be something that we look down upon, but rather something that helps elevate us and helps us understand each other better. And then finally, we're going to have our own Glenn Silver, IR Shura member, will discuss the importance of the next steps, political engagement, how we can move from a lot of the anger and a lot of the hardships we're facing right now into building power such that no one has to experience the Rodney King riots again. You know, I started this off by saying my father came here to the United States when the March on Washington happened. And then my brother was here when Rodney King and the LA fires happened. Why are we protesting the exact same thing, and why has nothing changed? But Brother Glenn Silver will offer us some steps forward, some solutions that we can perhaps implement in our lives and get together to build power and to prevent this from happening. Maybe not in our lives, but in our children's lives. So I'm going to turn it over to all our wonderful panelists right now. Just click that over there.
You ready? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I heard you before. I can't hear you now. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I heard Brother Glenn's papers.
Do a design career, but it didn't work out for him.
We can hear you.
Talking about this, and I said, look,
Imam Oliver, let's hear from you. What are some of your thoughts on this matter? Provide some historical context. Tell us a story about this. What can we learn? As you know, we have, I think, over 48 people watching this.
What should we learn about this matter of racism in Islam, and how can we be better allies to our community?
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Islamic Association of Raleigh for putting this panel together. I think it's very much needed, and it's wonderful that we can have this discussion as brothers in faith, but as well as brothers in humanity, as Muslim human beings who submit their will to God. But I just want to say that we are living in some very difficult times in America, particularly as Muslims. We're still dealing with the environment of Islamophobia, and then to be compounded with this virus, this global pandemic. Those are two major issues that are impacting the life of Muslims in particular. But then we have the other issue that's always been in America since its foundation, since the capitalistic economy and society was built. As African American men, even if you're not a Muslim, we've had to deal with the effects of capitalism. And in order to understand capitalism in America and the world, because capitalism has impacted the whole globe, you can't have a discussion about capitalism without going to the plantation in American history. Because the plantation and slavery is the foundation upon which the American economy rests. There would be no capitalism in America if there wasn't slavery and plantation. And so the discussion is appropriate because in order to understand what's happening now in American society, we need to understand the dynamics of the society. And one of those dynamics is that, as I hear it said most often now, that this is America's original sin, is slavery. And to understand that, the peculiar institution of slavery in America was different from any other type of slavery around the world in human history. Never before have millions of human beings were forced to lose their humanity. They had to become property of other people, and property in a way that they weren't human anymore. They had to dehumanize a whole people to make their conscience feel, have some semblance of peace in order to implement this strategy to produce this capitalistic economy. And so a lot of people lost lives, a lot of people lost humanity. There was over anywhere of 60, some historians say 60 to 80% of the slaves that were brought to America came from West Africa. And as you know, West Africa today is mostly Islamic. And so most of those slaves that came to America were Muslim. And they were Africans. And they were people who had to be dehumanized and stripped of everything that they originally possessed, their language, their culture, their religion, in order to become willing slaves or to become easily to it stripped the people of everything that they originally possessed. And there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, and the effects of slavery we still see today. The social structures, the social fabric of the African American community is torn. On the plantation, the master separated parents from their children, husbands from their wives. The men were used as breeders, and I can go on and on. So the question is, what is it like to be a Black man in America? Is to be under constant fear. I had a conversation earlier with my daughter. She had me on Facebook Live with some of her friends, and it's just, and most African American males will tell you that when we see a police car, there's anxiety. There's anxiety there. And some of these, I remember coming up as a young boy, I was telling them that I was born in 1953, and I think that was the same year that Emmett Till, a young African-American boy, he was a boy really, was lynched. And so to grow up in an environment, to be born in that environment and to hear my parents talk about their life, they were, their parents, their grandparents were literally slaves. And so my parents grew up on a farm, which was they were sharecroppers, which meant that when the slaves were set free, many of them didn't have any place to go. They had nothing to work. They couldn't work. And so many of them chose to stay on the plantation, and the master couldn't enslave them anymore. So he gave them a parcel of land to work as long as they would share the profits from the crops. And so many African-American families, even though slavery was over, they still lived in that environment. So they still had many of the remnants and the effects of slavery was very vivid in their culture, in their speech, in their behavior, in just the attitudes. And many of those, what I call survival tactics, were passed on to their children. And so I can say this, that to be an African-American man from my age group, we still have in us the effects of slavery, meaning that many of the slave survival tactics were passed on to us. I remember when my mother would send me downtown Durham to pay a bill, she would tell me, she was calling me Junior, said, Junior, do not stare at people. Now, right, this is in the late 60s. Said, Junior, do not stare at people, because she was concerned about what could happen to me because of the Emmett Till thing and many other things. She said, don't stare at people, pay the bill, and come on back home. So as I grew older, I began to reflect on that, and you could actually see that kind of behavior existing. I used to see my father. I used to go cut grass with him. At home, my father, God bless his soul, he was a roaring lion. But when he would take me to go cut the grass for white people, I could see a change in him. I could see that he wasn't that lion that was at home, but there was certain type of behavior acts or actions that a Black man had to have in order to survive, to survive. And so to be an African, to be a Black man in America, it means to be conscious of your fears, your frustrations, and your pain, and to always feel like you've been watched, that you've been watched and choked. and there's a lot of anger that comes with that. But I thank Allah for freeing for preserving at least some remnants of our ancestors' Islamic practices. As I did a little talk on the Eid, and I reminded the people who were listening that I've heard, and this is no offense against my immigrant brothers, I love them. They are my Muslim brothers, I love them. But there was an imam on the West Coast that were quoted years ago that said that the month of Ramadan is a new American tradition. That's not true. It's been here since slavery. Our African ancestors did Ramadan on the plantation, even if they had to do it in secret, they did it. They fasted. They prayed, they made salat. They did iftar. They did all those things, but they had to do it in secret, and many of them may have gotten caught, many of them got killed. So we have to say that it came with America, Ramadan. It just didn't start in the 80s. It's been here since the building of this country. So that's what I'll say. I could say more, and maybe I don't want to hog the time, as we used to say, but I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khair for sharing, Imam Oliver. That was a wonderful reflection, alhamdulillah. I'd like to also hear from, do we have Imam Salahuddin on here and Brother Musa Ramzi by chance? I think that you were very prescient. This was a very critical issue, that the lion, right? How your father was this
Yes.
lion at the house, and he lived very strongly. I think that's very true of a lot of immigrants can reflect to. And I try to draw back a connection to a lot of our immigrant communities, in that we need to stand as allies. So we can connect to that analogy of being that lion within the household, leading with an iron fist, but then you go outside and you leave just your front porch, and you have to put on a covering. You have to hide yourself. You can't be the true man you actually are.
Right.
And that's just what society expects of you, you know? Like, we got Rise Rashid here, mashallah, 6'4" man, but society is going to be scared of that. And for what reason? I know he's a gentle giant.
Well, I want to add this to what the Imam was just saying, because I grew up in a slightly different era, but I was raised by my father. May Allah be pleased with him, has passed on, but he passed at 62 in 2015. So you do the math, he'd be pushing 70 right now. We also saw some things like that where you had this lion at home, and then you would see kind of that incognito thing,
Right.
Out in public. But one thing that I'm happy that my father did with us was he told us, be better than that. You don't have to be incognito, because when you step out there, when your generation takes the torch, and when y'all are running the laps, it's going to be more of a thing that's mainstream, and you need to be seen as who you are. So no matter what arena that I'm in, I make sure, my necklace that, has Allah's name on it. It's always well known that I'm Muslim, and so forth and so on. But I will say this also, Brother Malcolm, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, may Allah be pleased with him as well. He carried that obviously before it was even popular to do. He let the world know, I am a Muslim man. He specified the type of Muslim, if there are types, as he progressed through his life. And for us, for people my age, I was born in 85. When we grew up watching that put a certain type of, a different type of lion in us, where we left the house and we still remain lions, And I think now, giving back to the next generation, we need to make sure that they take that a step further. You know what I mean? Because you don't need to just be a lion. The lion has to rule a certain type of way and has to implement things throughout society and leave his mark positively before, inevitably Allah calls us back home.
That's a very prescient analogy, yeah. The lion has to leave his mark before he's called back home. Alhamdulillah. Now I see Imam Salahuddin has joined us. Imam Salahuddin, do you have any reflections on what it's like growing up in America and the feelings that people might have right now, and how we can connect with that and better understand and process, and thus become better allies for our Black community? Actually, that brings us to a very interesting point real quick. The term Black, I was always uncomfortable using it. I thought it was, the wrong derogatory term to use. I was sitting in a class at NC Central, an HBCU, it's where I go to school. And we had to have this long discussion, kind of just for my benefit, because I didn't understand that Black is a politically correct term. African American is a term that is great and used, but it's used for those that emigrated specifically. But it delegitimizes those that have an American history. It delegitimizes those that went through the whole slavery process. So now we as an institution, Islamic Coalition in Raleigh, are making that difference. We're going to use the term Black and use the term African American when it's contextual. If we're talking about a Somali family that recently immigrated, you're African American, and you're Black if you choose to be. It comes down to the person, personal preference, but we understand now what the importance of those two terms are. I see Imam Salahuddin has joined us as well, and Brother Glenn has also raised his hand. If you have any reflections, feel free to hop in. I don't want to be the one talking here. I have no wisdom to offer at all. We've received a couple questions. I just wanted to update people. On our internal side, it's showing us 48, but apparently we have 100 people joining us on the YouTube stream. So alhamdulillah for that. Question about the Islamic Association of Raleigh. That's in Raleigh, North Carolina, the state capital. And then the As-Salam Islamic Association, Islamic Center, that's also in Raleigh. And I'll let Imam Oliver or Imam Salahuddin tell us a little more about what work they do.
So we have a question.
Before you do that, excuse me, I'd like to just give you another view on the use of the term Black versus African American. Whatever labels we use for ourselves, in America, there are only two categories. There's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male and an other. Everybody else is an other. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males are privileged. If you look at any data, it's an objective fact. For every dollar that my white counterpart, male counterpart earns, I earn about 75 or 80 something cents. So some of this is institutional. So these differences is how the labels we want to use on ourselves and context and all those things are fine, but we have to always be aware of how we are perceived by the powers that be, and including women, and even white women.
Thank you.
They are an other. If you look at what's going on in this country, the way this president and his cronies define people and everything else is him who's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male and everybody else is an other.
So true. It's an us versus them kind of thing.
But I do want to add this to that discussion just real fast. Again, for my generation, as you know, I'm 35. For us, a lot of Black pride was an active thing to be stripped away from us. So, you know, we weren't supposed to be proud to call ourselves Black or whatever label was placed upon us. So now, as you can see on my shirt, I identify as a Black male. And I say that proudly because I've had discussions with people who are knowledgeable people, but they say, brother, don't use that term Black to define me. I'm not Black. Black are the people of this or the. Brother, I come from a time where that was the agenda of the white Anglo-Saxon male, to make you not proud to say what you are. And whatever I define Black as being, it's my definition for me, and to have that pride, that's something that I'm going to identify with, and I'll carry that with me, you know.
And very much so. And also the use of the term Black, to me, is gives us a connotation of Pan-Africanism. That we are people of a Black skin pigment that identify globally with other people of the same pigment. We have to be one of the keys. Those of us who are familiar with Willie Lynch, one of the keys of this society we live in is to divide us and to cause these artificial ways of separating us. But those of us who are, that's why that umbrella category of other, this is why all these things intersect. And back to your point, brother, one of the things that we have to understand also, not only, one of the key things from my perspective that happened to us as Blacks in America, my generation, I'm 58, I grew up when it was segregated. And we as Blacks in America mistook integration for assimilation. We got the two things confused.
Yeah.
Because assimilation is from a French term that they used in their colonial expansion, where you assimilation, where you became similar. You gave up your African or whatever country you're from, Cameroon, whatever area of the world you were from that the French conquered. You gave up that identity to become a French citizen. It was artificial, but they stripped you of your culture. The British had a different way called indirect rule. And so what we in America, what Blacks in America as a whole, as a community did, when they integrated, and we were told that we could sit at the same lunch counters, and we were told that we could vote and our votes counted the same, we mistook that, meaning that, okay, if I become similar to the white majority, then that means I will be accepted as equals.
Right.
Integration didn't mean that. Integration means that I can become equal as a human with you, but still maintain my identity and my cultural heritage as a Black person. This is and I'm going to turn over to Imam Salahuddin, who just joined us. But one of the things we have to understand, this is the example I gave people. You take salt and you take black pepper in two different shakers, and you put them together and you still can see the black and white, but they're integrated. Mm. You take salt and you put it in water and it liquefies and dissipates, and you can't tell the salt from the water. It liquefies. That's the difference in assimilation and integration. Integration means that we can be a part of a greater whole, but still maintain our unique identity. This is one of the beauties of Islam. But assimilation means that I give up who I am to become part of what you say I ought to be.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for that. I wanted to just weigh in here with you all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you all for inviting us to be a part of this platform. And I'm thankful to you all, and thankful to Imam Oliver for also being a participant and basically laying the foundation as to what happened to us. We can't deny it. It did happen. And in terms of someone talking about identity, they stripped everything away from us. So we identify with whatever they gave us. And it was just later on in our time here that we begin to come back to who we really are. And some of us have not come back yet, because the plantation life, or that seed or that dust is still in some of us. We still have that idea. So we don't even look to ourselves as being unique. And so, yeah, we just kind of blend in. And I don't think we should be doing that either. And we could get into all kind of names all we want, but the names may identify one particular thing. But the reality is, are you a human being? And they have not treated us like human beings. And this is the reason why we still see how they're killing our men, because they don't respect us as human beings. They look down on us. And so if they kill us, it's like you're just sweeping up some dirt in the society. So it means nothing. And the reality is, Allah SWT said that he made all of us from Adam and Hawa, right? He made all of us from Adam and Hawa, and we are all dignified, honorable human beings, but they don't get that. So we struggle in the society, because as we try to move and have our being and be who we are and do the things that we need to do for our communities, we have this individual out here that want to kill us and destroy us and not let us breathe and have our life as dignified, honorable human beings. So that's the struggle. And the reality of it is that everybody does the same thing. Everybody who comes to this country, they see us and they're told that we are nothing but dirt or dust or less than dust or less than an animal. If you want to make it in America, you have to step over them or step on them. So people do it. So I am the one who say that it's a problem. It's identified with these people, these white folks, and how they treat us. But what bothers me more than that is the people who say they're like me, meaning we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and I'm treated that way by them. No, they don't kick me or they don't stomp on me literally, but yet that's the attitude that they have. And so you can see how it puts us in this position where we are not seen as dignified, honorable human beings right amongst our own. You know, I love it when somebody puts up a sign and says, there's no racism in Islam. That's true. Islam proper. But when you start talking about human beings, the individuals come in with their particular attitudes and their customs, etc., yeah, you have people that have prejudices that I submit you really can't have if you understand Tawheed. Right. It cannot exist in the heart at the same time. So those individuals, to me, who claim Islam, but yet they have this prejudice for this black man who is Islam or Islamically inclined and who is living an Islamic life, and they can't accept that, that to me is even worse. Okay? I'm not trying to get away from what white folks did, what happened to our brother George Floyd, what happened to our sister, or any of them. That still happens. But until we do what we're supposed to do as Muslims, and I'm talking about all of us. When I left New York, when I was in New York, in Newburgh, they used to call it the Black Mosque because the majority of the people there were black. Because of immigration, not conversion or reversion, but because of immigration, a lot of people from other countries moved in. They became the majority of the masjid. We became the minority of the masjid. But we were there all together, right? So we began to see how, people begin to look at you. They look at you and, some people even have the attitude to say, like someone asked me, and I know what he said, and I got to say this. We had the brother that died, and the brother asked me, is he Muslim? I felt insulted that the brother would ask me, how the heck I'm going to talk to you about burying this brother? Like, I don't know my deen. We don't know what Islam says. I'm going to give you somebody that's not a Muslim to bury in a Muslim cemetery just to get that done. That's not right. So we have this problem, but we can fix it. I believe we can fix a lot of it in terms of how we deal with the situation. We as Muslim brothers and sisters of whatever denomination, whatever, I'm not going to say race, but culture, ethnicity, we have to come together and do what Allah says. Just like I mentioned when I spoke Friday, that I don't care if you're an imam of a masjid, a preacher, a pastor, a rabbi, every one of us should be standing up for the truth. Every one of us should be standing up firmly for justice as witnesses to the truth. Allah says that in the Quran. We need to do that. If we see something wrong, like you say you see something in me, and Allah's messenger said that you are a mirror unto me, you can see something in me that I may not be able to see in myself. Once you see it, I should accept it. So I'm saying to my Muslim brothers and sisters who may come here from other countries, get that out of you. When you get that out of you, we all can become one and be so tight that nothing can mess with us, that there would be nothing that would be able to penetrate us because we would be that close. And it'd be more than just you saying, straighten the lines. We don't want Shaitan to be in the line. No, in reality, we have to be together. We have to be tight, okay? We as Muslims should be the leaders of the world, in my opinion. Of course, you're going to hear from another person, the Africanist or whatever. They're going to say something different, but I believe we're supposed to be the leaders of the world. So we have to lead by example, by following the pristine purity of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then we begin to see matters change. That's my humble belief. Thank you for your time.
Imam Salahuddin, Jazakallah khair for that. And one of the things that I, in my private discussions and in my discussions in other smaller groups and other settings, is just an objective fact that our fellow immigrant Muslims, brothers and sisters, enjoy some privileges and rights that our ancestors who were brought here in slavery bought and paid for. So there's a debt. The fact that you can go into the front door of a restaurant and sit down with people who have a different complexion than you, my folk got hung from trees like strange fruit for that. And so that's just a fact. And so that's another level of honor than dishonor. The things that privileges and appearances of rights that you have civilly and politically, not quite economically, is they were bought and paid for with the blood of my ancestors. And some of that I witnessed. They burned crosses in my father's business. I've been called names and couldn't say anything back about it. I remember when you went down the sidewalk and if a person of lighter complexion came along, you had to step aside. And I'm not that old. It hadn't been that long ago. And we have to understand and we have to remind our immigrant brothers and sisters that the things that the stereotypes that you might hear about us, the privileges that you have to open a business and to not have to sit in the back of a bus or not have to go to a side entrance, to be able to make a doctor's appointment and not have to go in and take a number, is because we paid the price for that. And that's something that we have to remind ourselves of, and it's not being arrogant, it's just a statement of fact.
That's right.
That this carpet wasn't rolled out for you. You think you got a red carpet when you came through immigration to this country. That carpet wasn't red because it was a carpet of welcome. It was red because it had the blood of my folks on it.
Yes, sir.
Hey, well, can I just add something into that too, just real quick? Again, representing a different generation, being being born in the mid '80s and raised in the '90s, we feel a lot of that stress that the racism within Islam has made us divide a lot. Because of that, some people that are my age now, they won't welcome, they don't even want to come to a masjid like IAR because they like, I want to go to the black masjid. Where are all the brothers at? Where are all the black folk at? That's where they want to go. And I think there's a lot of levels of that. If we wish to progress, we got to start removing some of that. You know what I mean? We got to, we are a very forgiving people, and sometimes maybe too much in some people's opinion, but some levels of this thing we got to start saying and reminding ourselves that we're Muslims, and that Allah obviously mentions throughout the Quran that He is most merciful, He is all for, He's the forgiving, and who are we not to be? You know what I mean? So we kind of got to start saying, okay, y'all have been that way for too long, my Muslim brothers and sisters that are not, black or don't identify as black. But now let's come back together and let's get back into that, analogy, like you said, the salt and the pepper together and make some progress.
Can I just jump in? Can I jump in for?
Yes, please, Brother Musa.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just want to thank the brothers for, setting up this forum. And, there's a lot to be said about race in America. It's a very painful time because, of course, there's a lot of emotions. There are a lot of historical baggage that goes along with this discussion. One of the things that I am totally convinced on is that we will not be able to understand racism in America until we understand it from an Islamic standpoint. Because if we look at the Quran and if we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we can clearly see that the ideal way to deal with any human being is through the commandments of Allah and through the Sunnah of his messenger that has been sent for all of mankind. So, when we see all of these unique problems that we are experiencing here in America, a country that is recognized as being very advanced in its technology and its education, but we know that it's still a society that is rife with jahiliyyah. Yeah. And the jahiliyyah that we are seeing is, in essence, and I believe my brother mentioned it, is because there are many of us here in the United States who still don't understand who Allah is. Not only do we don't know who Allah is, we don't understand his guidance and his directives that he has given for us as human beings, and also how we should govern ourselves as a people. And one of the things that I would just like to offer before, I give up this, this time is, you will find that Islam has put a great deal of emphasis, first and foremost, on the purification of the human being, tazkiyatul nafs, how we have to purify our hearts to be good receptacles for Allah's guidance. So, this is one of the things we see the teachings of our religion. It puts a great deal of emphasis on purifying the self. Yes. And then when you look at most of the guidelines that we have on our social functions, we see that the principles of adl, justice, they have to be established. We have to be able to look at how we govern ourselves as a people, in our communities, in our nations, in our families, in the country. But one of the highlighted features of Islam is justice. There has to be justice. Mm-hmm. And one of the overriding principles of Islam is jalb al-masalih wa dar al-mafasid. Jalb al-masalih is that it is a duty and an obligation upon the society or the governing force within the society to bring about benefit for all of its citizens, not just a selected few. And dar al-mafasid is to prevent harm from coming to people within that society. And if you don't have that apparatus or that mechanism in full force, then what you have is this benign neglect. Yes. Benign neglect is when you have the duty and the responsibility to do something, but you don't fulfill those responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And this is why we have all of these protests all over the country, because there are many people who feel like our society is not living up to its duty and responsibility for protecting its citizens. And for surety, African Americans and people of color are citizens of this country. So, one of the things that I would just like to highlight is, justice is a very important characteristic. And anytime you see people, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has mentioned that there are so many traditions, sayings on how racism, asabiya, tribalism, all of these things are forms of jahiliyyah. Right. They are forms of expressions of people not understanding what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. They are people who have not understood the true process of education. Mm-hmm. So, in my, just in a couple of words, I would like to express, education, and I believe this is one of the most important things on this platform. I read the Facebook description of this platform. Is, one of the number one steps towards combating this jahiliyyah, this attitude, this racism, this asabiya, is to start educating. Educating ourselves. There are a number of books that have been written by many, very dynamic researchers on what is happening, here in the United States to, African Americans, people of color. And one of the things that you will find is, for us to understand this type of racism that we're experiencing here, because there's racism in many, many places, for sure. But when we look at the racism that we are experiencing here, this racism, it has to be understood in a historical context, because we know slavery, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, Black codes, all of these things are a part of the context on the historical landscape that we have to take into consideration when we're looking at the type of racism that we're dealing with here. The next thing is we have to look at the sociological landscapes of racism here. I think brothers have mentioned this also. We have redlining. The reason why we have percentages of African Americans or people in color living in certain segments of the society or cities. This is not by coincidence. It's not by choice. This is by design. So there is an institutionalized process to keep African Americans and people of color in a certain platform. And then we have to look at the psychological effects of racism here in the United States as well.
Definitely.
And that psychological, I think, in my mind, more than anything else, is the implicit bias. And if we look at the implicit bias, there are many whites and non-blacks or non-people of color. They try, but they don't realize the narrative that has been created about racism here, that they have this implicit type of, they don't even understand and realize that they are playing into a narrative that has been crafted from hundreds of years ago. So, even for some of our brothers and sisters who are coming from overseas, all of us are affected by this implicit bias. It's a narrative that is very unique to the United States. And I really think, if we begin to educate ourselves in the proper way, then we can, first and foremost, not let this type of institutionalized process affect us, where we begin to harm others. But at the same time, we begin to understand what this Jahiliyyah is all about. And in the beginning, I mentioned that, it can only be understood if we look through the lens of the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet, and in this way we can move forward. So in my closing, I think that the Muslims, all of the believers, that we have a lot to offer and a lot to share on this particular issue on racism in America, because we do have the Book of Allah. And if we cultivate this guidance into our hearts and purify our souls and begin to, organize ourselves and be examples in our masjids and in our homes and in our communities, then we will see that justice, true justice, has to be, in the forefront. And, there's a very unique verse, and if you can just look it up, it's in Surah 5, Ayat 8. I was amazed to see this, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says to be just as it is close to taqwa. To be just because it is close to taqwa. So we know that our beliefs, our faith, it is very much a part of the justice system that we have to establish for ourselves. It is just not a formal system or a judicial system that we put on the side, because unfortunately, this is what we're seeing in the United States. We have many laws that have been passed, for education. We have many laws that have been passed for, certain rights that African Americans have been struggling for many years. But because these rights that they haven't really penetrated into the hearts of the people, we see that the law is on one side and the attitudes and the actions and the functions of the people is something very, very different. So, in essence, just thinking about policing of people of color, you can get, and I think, I know my two imams here, they work in the prison system. I work in the prison system too. When a person of color steps into the judicial system, he steps back like 40 or 50 years because, the way that the people think, the judges, the juries, the process of justice, it puts you in a system where you begin to see what institutionalized racism is really all about. This is why we have so many people of color who are incarcerated. This is why the policing of people of color, you see this brutal type of double standard. And it's because of the narrative and the implicit and the explicit, both of them. They are there. And I think people are just getting tired of this brutalization. And I just pray that, we can come to some real firm understanding on how we can move forward as a community, first as Muslims, and how we can offer some solutions to the broader society so we all can remedy some of these injustices that we are seeing. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah.
Allah Akbar.
Jazakallah khair to all our wonderful panelists, Brother Musa, for that beautiful reflection and the reminder that Islam guides us to have to do better and to kind of fix the Jahiliyyah times that we're in and to address these issues, as well as discussing mass incarceration. You look at our jails and our prison systems right now, they're full of African-American Black men who have been arrested for nonviolent crimes, very small possession charges, having a taillight busted out. We know how that can happen and we know what that can lead to. Or very small things like maybe missing a fine or missing a payment on something, and that leads to a whole systemic issue. And then once you've got a single charge on your record, that one single violation for something tiny like having a taillight busted out, but going and being arrested for that, that prevents the rest of your life from happening. You can't go get a loan. You can't go live in certain neighborhoods. You can't send your children to certain schools. It's a whole systemic system. And then to help us understand what we, and I know a lot of our audience as immigrants and non-Black individuals, I'd like to have Imam AbuTaleb come and talk to us about what is our responsibility as Muslims to combat these injustices, inshallah, and then also to talk about what the Islamic perspective is. We received a question from a viewer of certain Imams have said that protesting is not Islamic. If Imam AbuTaleb has the ability to answer that question, I'm certain our audience would love to hear. So Imam AbuTaleb, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala rasulillah. I begin with a prayer of Prophet Musa in the Holy Quran. I ask Allah to expand my chest, to facilitate my affair, and to loosen a knot from my tongue, that they may understand what I say. First, I want to greet and appreciate all of our esteemed listeners, and most especially, alhamdulillah, our distinguished panel, my imams, my teachers, and my brothers. It's an honor to be with all of you, and actually my message has to do primarily with what I'm here to do. I'm here today primarily to listen. And my invitation to everyone joining us today starts with that. Starts with listening and connecting with others, in particular with the experience of Black Americans and Black American Muslims. That seems easy, but particularly for our younger generation, and Brother Jamil, we're not that young anymore, right? The 80s generation, but we like to act young, right? But especially talking to our generation and younger, sometimes we get a little bit too comfortable behind that computer screen and that activism on Facebook and Twitter. And that's important. That's a big part of raising the collective consciousness now. But it's incomplete. It's incomplete in our living of our faith ideals and our duty towards our fellow human beings. The Prophet ﷺ was the most eloquent of all people. And in a sense, he could have been history's greatest preacher and stopped there. The Prophet ﷺ, most of his speeches are very short. His words are very concise, because a huge part of his life was outside the walls of the masjid. It was with people, walking with people, understanding the suffering of people, connecting with people. He was incredibly relatable and incredibly, concerned and empathetic. But that starts with understanding. I want you to appreciate when Imam Oliver and Brother Glenn share with us, their experience, and particularly for them to have the openness of spirit and heart to open, a window for us to connect with their, experience and their most sacred memories with their father and their fathers and mothers, and their experience growing up Black in America and living, alhamdulillah, now leading the Muslim community. We're incredibly privileged to hear that and connect with that. But that takes work and it takes courage on behalf of each of us to get out from our comfort zone. And look, let's ask some uncomfortable questions today. Right. What does your circle of friends look like? If I look at your phone contact list, or if I look at who typically comes over to your house, or if I look at who you have dinner with, how diverse is that group? What does it look like? And look, I don't usually say this in public, but today I say it not by, just by means of drawing out a lesson. Alhamdulillah, the brothers that, and my imams and teachers that are on the call today, we didn't meet behind a media screen. We didn't meet on giving a speech. I say this in public, what we often say in private, hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might benefit me with it on the day of judgment. But the love and respect that I truly hold in my heart for Imam Oliver, for Imam Salahuddin, you know, two of the first people when I came, one of the youngest, lead imams of a large masjid in America, coming to Raleigh, North Carolina, the openness of heart and the way I'm conscious that they were serving before I was born, and for them to just open that experience and welcome me, although there's so much more experience and senior than me, I will never forget that for my life. And that's why, alhamdulillah, you know, if you frequent our mosque, you know that you've seen each of our presence in a Saddam Center, Islamic Center, and in IR, because ultimately we're Muslims before we're serving in any capacity. So that doesn't mean we're perfect, but it means we're trying. And I'm going to challenge you, and I'm sorry, I'm going to push you. We're not here to make each other comfortable. We're here to be better. If our circles of friends are not reflecting that, if we're not pushing ourselves, that's an opportunity to grow right now from this call. Don't just be satisfied that we're going to put a couple comments and push ourselves, but come out with some actions that you can bring into your life. And that starts with listening and being moved and being connected. Look, when you hear these experiences, when you understand the privilege, and you know, there's so much we need to learn. That's why I think this conversation needs to continue. But let me say particularly to the segment of our Muslim community that is, you know, ethnically from an Arab or Middle Eastern background, or for a Desi and South Asian background, you know, the depths behind what Brother Glenn Silver and others have been teaching us today about assimilation and integration. And particularly, you know, when you're filling out your census paperwork or doing your driver's license, and if you're of Arab or Middle Eastern ethnicity, you're legally white, but you're not socially white. You're legally white, but you're not socially white. And you know, the enormous number, subhanAllah, of people that hail from a heritage of a rich area of the world with multiple different countries and a number of different, you know, heritage and histories. They're now in modern day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and surrounding countries. Another similar situation, right? And what we've done as Muslims is we've forgotten our own principles, right? So this game and this, you know, unfortunate modern manifestation of a crime that we do not equate, obviously, with the original sin that Imam Oliver was teaching us about with slavery. But sadly, those roots and those continual things that are intertwined systemically into our government, into our systems, into our institutions. When we're not in touch with our faith and with our principles, what happens is, as Imam Salahuddin was teaching us, that creeps into our hearts and minds. That creeps into our homes. That creeps into our work. That creeps into our action. And we have to be accountable for that across the board, young and old, from every part, right? Not to be naive that we don't see color and we're just above this. No, we all see color, and it's all part of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acknowledged it as a purposeful part of his creation. That diversity, right? And Allah acknowledged it in Surah Al-Hujurat, Surah number 14, verse number 13, and said that it was for a purpose, that we may come to know and draw closer to one another. And look, part of that is the accountability and awareness that this is not the end of our journey. This is yet another stop on a lot of hard work we have to do. I appreciate Sister Meha Ali in the comments and a number of others that have echoed it, that have acknowledged an opportunity, inshallah, to be better and improve. That part of the way we need to enhance this conversation is to hear from our respected Black American women, and particularly Black American Muslim women, right? And yes, we are ready to be accountable and to grow together, but it starts with that presence of support and these relationships with one another. And you know, racism in America is clearly a reality. But sadly, racism also in many Muslims' hearts is a reality as well. It is very real. But part of what I want to acknowledge and challenge us us with today is that it doesn't need to be a reality in your heart. As Ustad Musa was saying, Allah Azza wa Jal has granted us these upstanding principles and these values to work against our lower selves and elevate ourselves. And I want to understand that is hard work. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ themselves, I'm not talking about year one in Mecca or day one of Islam. After they were with the Messenger of God ﷺ, for 10 and 15 years, they would make mistakes. Their old tribal allegiances would flare up. But you know, something that differentiated them from us is that they were able to rise up to those principles. When they made mistakes, they didn't start wiping each other in the dust or start acting like these problems, they're outside. They're not in my heart because I don't see color. No, they were real, right? And so when two esteemed companions made such a serious mistake that one said to the other, "Oh, son of a black woman, that's a serious mistake." But what happened was there was redemption.
That's right.
In front of the Prophet ﷺ, not sweeping it under the rug, not ignoring it, but in terms of the companion who recognized that he went way out of bounds.
Right.
But then what did he show? He was ready to get down on the floor and kiss the feet of the other companion. Just as over the top, I want to correct what I did. Now, how many of us have that courage and that humility with one another, that ability to work? And let me say something uncomfortable. Do you know how many of the most activists and most, the biggest proponents of social justice across, our Muslim community, when I sit with them in private, they tell me their households, their family members are using the term abid, a derogatory Arabic term for black Muslims, for black people, excuse me, and for people of color in general. Do you understand how many people that are most active, and when these incidents come up, stand up and talk about working as allies and support, but then what happens a day or a week or months later, they're gone. And for our Black American brothers and sisters, in particular our Black American Muslim brothers and sisters, this problem doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear because your focus shifted somewhere else.
Right.
So again, we need to uncomfortably challenge ourselves, right? We need to uncomfortably challenge ourselves that just because racism is a reality in some Muslims' hearts doesn't mean that you need to give it space in your heart. But that's going to take hard work. All of these people, not just in the Muslim community, but these horrific acts by law enforcement officers, by some law enforcement officers, and the institutional manifestations of reality, those people are somebody's husband or somebody's wife or somebody's father or mother. The seeds of that occurred in some household before it showed on a street.
Right.
And a reality is a lot of us are active outside. I'm not telling you to disrespect or go out of bounds, but I'm saying you can take a principled stand with yourself and your loved ones and start with our circle. And part of it, by the way, is us confronting this in our own communities. And again, this is an hour for courage, not for cowardice. Part of this, particularly in the context of the Islamic Association of Raleigh, and I think I could say in the broader, Triangle community as well. Part of this was critically examining the relationship with our own history. I want to appreciate the comment of, Sister Duha, and I appreciate also the work that she and her colleagues do, mashallah, through Muslim Women 4 and through all of our nonprofits in the area and all of our sister masajid and Muslim institutions. That relationship with our own history, right? As Imam Oliver was talking about the reality of the Ramadans, many Ramadans that were lived in this country, and through incredibly greater sacrifices and hardship than most of us have ever imagined or lived through, right? We have to be in touch with that important history, and sadly part of our collective amnesia. And in fact, part of the living of the very, implicit biases and issues that Ustaz Musa and Brother Glenn raised to our awareness, is that we've lost touch with our own Islamic values and history and our own American history, and particularly American Muslim history. Some of you were present last Ramadan, not this one that just passed, but the one before. For me, one of the most moving series of Khawatir that I've ever been part of. I wish there was longer time. You know how tight Ramadan is in terms of time. We need to bring this back as a conversation. But for a month, we were talking about these stories of incredible figures in our, Muslim history in America. That's not a year or a couple decades or from the 1900s, right? And to think of the collective sacrifice, right? The blood that Brother Glenn and others were talking about. Can you imagine that for these hundreds of years, that born right here in North Carolina and dying right here in North Carolina after 94 years, passed away a year before the Emancipation Proclamation at 94 years of age. Ahmaud ibn Sa'id is one of the only, if not perhaps the only surviving autobiography that wasn't tainted and distorted by America. Can you imagine for 300 or 400 years that nobody's account of their own life survived without somebody else tainting it? We had a session that Ramadan that talked about Black American Muslim women. And it was a collective session. It wasn't named. It was almost a reminder of so many of our mothers. You know why? Because aside from the atrocities that our mothers faced in these lands so we could enjoy much of the privilege and freedoms that we find today, that their names and their stories individually overwhelmingly are lost by history, but not lost in our mind if we work hard enough. And right here in Raleigh, part of that was the masjid having the courage to come to grips that we are not talking enough about our roots in this neighborhood, for the IAR and the historic method neighborhood, and the sacrifices, not 300 years ago alone, but in now and the few years and the decades past when there was no building, no nothing, no anything. And that was primarily borne by our Black Raleigh Muslim brothers and sisters, the connection of our neighborhood to Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. For those of you that don't know, and you need to know, the sacrifices particularly, the Imam Kenneth Muhammad, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him, and Sister Margaret, may Allah azza wa jal grant her health and strength, that made moving to this area and truly transforming Islam in the entire triangle area, right? And let me tell you something, Imam Sahaddin, I think I'm gonna make a lot of enemies today, but it's okay, it's worth it.
I'm with you, brother.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Part of this, when we talk about how do we make this change, and this is what I'm really looking forward to hearing more about from our panel, is to understand, let's not be those people that get frustrated and disappear.
Right.
Let's not be just hashtag activists. How do we move towards positive change in our community? And part of that is understanding in our local context, we have a real capacity to seek to affect change. From the beauty of our religion is that we're not responsible for for the results. We're responsible for the action. The results are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it might change in our generation, or it might be passed on to the next generation, but then not with the shame of people that watched this and did nothing, or went to get their next dollar and their next comfort, but worked to advance that. And very much as we inherited the dreams and the sacrifices of generation after generation, right? Brother Diallo, may Allah have mercy on him, who in Kent County, Maryland, was stealing away to pray his 5 daily prayers in secret in the forest under penalty of being caught, so that you and I could pray in comfort and security. The very Ahmaud ibn Sa'id, rahimahullah, who writes He was a literate man, a very educated man, and writes, Ya Ahla America, Ya Ahla Carolina. In Arabic, he says, O people of America, O people of Carolina. And then his voice sadly drifts off into the voice of a slave. My master is a good man. So that pain of 94 years is captured. But look how Allah has lifted the name of this man. Why? Because he didn't find the results of his work in his lifetime, but he found it celebrated by people 150 years later. So in our communities, we need to be more accountable to getting out of our seats and doing the hard work of affecting change. I'm the first one to raise my hand and say, we're not perfect. That's why I'm glad several of the comments today are constructively critical, are holding accountable, are lifting us up. We all need to be open and welcoming of that nasiha. It's a core part of our religion. But the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, مَنْ رَأَ مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ. Whoever sees with you from among you an evil, let him or her change it with their hand. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. If they are unable, then by their tongue. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. Then if they're not able, then in their heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. And this is the weakest of faith. Some of the scholars said, if that's all you do, this is very short distance between you and leaving and absence of faith. Why? Because the believer is someone who's empathetic and concerned. So if you're lifting up these stories and these voices, that's good. But if you're able to do more, that's insufficient. That is spiritually insufficient. If you have the privilege that when you're coming out and affecting change with your hands, meaning action, if you're participating in a protest, if you're advocating, if you're writing a letter to the county commissioners or to your elected officials, if you're connecting with a person, connecting with them with mental health and wellness resources, because people also individually suffer as a result of this. If you are just picking up the phone and letting people know that you're not alone, if you're acting as an ally and a support, you have all of that and you're not doing any of it, then there's a spiritual gap, because we can be better. Because alhamdulillah, though what we face though what Black Americans face today is unacceptable, and though systemic and institutional racism remains unacceptable, we must also acknowledge that for the vast majority of people, or for many people that are able to act, we're not facing what was faced by generations past. Yes. So if you have the privilege to be able to make a difference, and particularly those that need to serve as allies here and need to remain connected, then we need to live up to that possibility. And I am alarmed that at times when I see the criticism of our local context, and that criticism is important, that nasiha is important, but sometimes we're stuck, we're out of step. And that's where when we listen more, when we connect more, when we empathize more, you can't have a heart and hear what people are experiencing except that you're going to be moved to action.
That's right.
You can't be in relationship with our brothers and sisters and connect with these experiences except, inshallah, that by the goodness in our faith and our heart, we are going to be moved to action. And so part of that is also not living in the ideals of this national conversation, which is part of it, but the realities of the local organic change that's going to move that national business. I'm going to be very clear. I'm not minimizing the importance of all the spectrum of work, you know, our national leaders, civil rights organizations, advocacy, and so on. But I'm speaking to a majority of our community who most of the change that they will affect is in their hearts and in their homes and in their communities. Part of that is really the courage to get around the table, to have these discussions. And let me tell you, we're not perfect, but if this is the first time that you're hearing about this discussion, we've missed you the last 5 years.
Longer.
And I encourage you to get more engaged. I am not saying that arrogantly. Our marketing leaves much to be desired. We are trying to get better, especially in the age of coronavirus. But this conversation has been ongoing. Dare I say, I think, and you know, Michelle, I sit on the Triangle Imams Council with my brothers, and I say this not out of bias or pride. I say this because this is very important to us. I am not sure that there is another community in America, not a national convention or an alliance of the willing, but a messy conglomerate of a very diverse Muslim community like ours in the Triangle. I am not sure that there is another community that rivals ours, or at least is on par with the conversations we have been having about race, about these issues with ours. That does not mean where we belong. That does not mean we're perfect. That doesn't mean that you on the call don't have the ability to lift us 10 levels up. We need you. Maybe my brother imams are more comfortable with the Zoom and stuff, but once I became imam, I lost track of all technology. I can't do any of this, right? So we need folks to come on and help us out. We need to facilitate this conversation.
Yes.
If I know some of you are not able to come to the masjid, but if you log on to the Friday khutbahs these days, guess what? We're talking about these stories. If you don't know the story that Imam Oliver mentioned about, a very tragic story of Emmett Till, listen to the khutbah this Friday, because we want to educate one another and lift this up and move ourselves. And inshallah, those actions locally, including engagement with our local elected officials, our local law enforcement officers, and so on, talking about Raleigh and the Triangle is an important part of living up to our responsibility in this. Pardon me, I've gone a little bit longer than I want. I want to make sure, inshallah, we continue to hear action items from our esteemed panel. I'm really, honestly, would have preferred not to share anything. I appreciate my brother imams, giving me the ability and permission to share a few words. But about just the protest, I encourage, inshallah, everyone to have an open heart for the huge spectrum of important work that has to be done. Some of us, each of us is talented in some way. Some of us are going to focus on lifting up the story. Some of us are going to focus on advocacy. Some of us are going to focus on getting out there. And nobody here has the ability to do everything and everything. But important thing is to get out of the way of our brothers and sisters. Just because one is good at something or passionate at something, don't put down other work. But at the same time, in that regard, I personally look at protests as potential power. In other words, it's a show of bringing people together. It galvanizes people to action. And there's a lot of good in it, but I encourage everyone not to be satisfied with that alone. There is important work, and perhaps, inshallah, Brother Glenn and others can lift up some of that work that, before this present string of loss of life and unspeakable tragedy, but on other important local issues, on homelessness and the tragedy of children and families that, people seeking to evict them from hotels and telling them to shelter in home when they don't have a home, right? And don't want to provide that support, or the reality of support of local business. These are things that dozens of your Muslim brothers and sisters have been advocating about, meeting with elected officials, advocating for, and part of this also is growing our ability to engage and discuss, inshallah, this with local law enforcement. So jazakumullah khairan for the opportunity to learn from all of you and be with all of you, inshallah.
Inshallah. I wanted to thank you very much for that. And I just wanted to share this real fast. I know I've been jumping in a lot, but I just kind of want to share this and then get out the way. One of the jobs, my brother Cassius spoke towards it. One of the jobs that I do here in Raleigh, what brought me to Raleigh, is working in the school system. I work in Millbrook High School, and my job specifically is a discipline counselor. My job is to take the students that are being sent out of classrooms and escort them to in-school suspension. Of course, there's a piece between that where, that I have to build and counsel them in that time period. I know some of my elder brothers are saying how, y'all are going into the jails and, doing the work that obviously is much needed there. I just want to remind everybody that before those brothers of ours become inmates, they are students being sent out of classrooms and being sent to in-school suspension. I think as we continue to carry on this thing that we've been blessed with, which is Islam, which is for all mankind, as the example to raise the entire level of humanity, we have to be cognizant of those students in that next generation. Because, you know, as the brother said, we of the 80s babies, we're not young anymore, and we're some of the less seasoned guys on this call right now. We have to be aware of what we are talking about, and including those young people who are going to end up in some of the same shoes as us if we don't jump on and start to include them in these conversations and spaces.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Jamil, for that. That was a wonderful reflection. The school to prison pipeline is definitely a huge issue, and the criminalization of Black students that are more highly focused on. You go through to Black schools and you see metal detectors there. You go to a white school or school in a white neighborhood, everything's easy, hunky-dory. You're not going to see anyone getting patted down, anyone getting waved down. So there is a huge issue that we can address. Imam AbuTaleb touched on something very critical, in that this is not the first discussion we're having. This is the first public conversation we might be discussing, this community might be having on this issue, but it is not the first step the Islamic Association of Raleigh has taken. Inshallah, we'll have the khutbah about Emmett Till next week, but throughout the past few years, the Islamic Association of Raleigh has been engaged with a group of local activists and local organizers on the very issues of homelessness and affordable housing and other issues that predominantly, from the audience that has attended these hearing sessions, is predominantly African American and Black, has brought up these issues of being their own issues. And one of the critical issues that was also raised is police brutality and this school to prison pipeline. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time for today, and I appreciate everyone for sticking through us. But I'd like to give the floor to Brother Glenn Silver just to give us a small taster of what we can do as a community. Is everyone in our community, IAR represents almost 92 nationalities and has about 7,000 people that attend our Eid Salahs. So Brother Glenn's going to give us a small taster, a small snippet of what we can do going forward, as well as a snippet of our next, inshallah, discussion on this issue about the next steps. Today we heard about the historical context, how, you know, I think Brother Glenn also said this very succinctly, that the blood on the red carpet that they roll out the airport, it's the blood of everyone else on this call's ancestors. And we've heard a lot about what it means to be a Black man in America, what that fear is like, to be that lion in the house, but to be a mouse on the streets, and that fear. So I'm going to give it over to Brother Glenn Silver just to give us a small taster of what we can expect in our next discussion, inshallah. And then I'm going to pass over the baton to all our wonderful speakers just to say some closing words, inshallah. And Imam Oliver will be doing, or Imam Sheikh Musa will be doing our dua today, inshallah. I really enjoyed his khutbah last week, so I'm going to give it over to him, inshallah. And if you want to see that khutbah, it's available on this YouTube page. So Brother Glenn Silver, take us away.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I wrote a blog that was published yesterday about a prescription for curing the chronic disease of racism in America. And there is no panacea. First of all, we have to understand that when we talk about the protests that we're seeing and versus the response that we want to see. As Imam AbuTaleb said, a protest is a potential, but a protest is a reaction. There's a difference in a reaction and a response. A reaction is a defense mechanism. It's an emotional outcry of agony. And that's what we're seeing in all the burning and all the looting and some of the other things. And it's understandable, even though we may not endorse it, but it's understandable because it's a cry of agony and pain and frustration. But a response is more measured, it's more contemplative, it's more methodical. And that's where we need to move. We need to move from this potential to some kinetic energy that's moving things along. And so one of the things we have to understand that we got to go from riots as reactions to some political engagement as a response. In the whole spectrum of political mechanisms, you have a lot of things. A protest is a political action. Voting is political participation. Being a member of a social group or political movement, that's political involvement. But engagement requires commitment. Those of us who know we use the term betrothed or engaged for our spouses, that means you have made a commitment to go ahead and make the marriage commitment and make that commitment for life. So political engagement, and political engagement can appear to be boring. It's the stuff that goes on in the background. Imam AbuTaleb knows that we work with the IR advocates in One Wake. Political engagement are those sessions and those meetings that you have that nobody knows about. Those things that aren't necessarily publicized, but they do end up having an impact. So the challenge for us, that Imam AbuTaleb has given us an individual challenge to look at our phones and our circle of friends and those kind of things. But we need a more broad net circle. It's sort of a community challenge. It's easy for us to get up and make a sign or make a call or sign a petition. But the challenge for political engagement is for us to look at where are the opportunities for me to serve. We can start at IR, we can start at one of the other masjids, we can start it with our local government, we can start in the school system. If you're a parent, if you're not a parent, if you're just an interested party, what are some of the opportunities that are there? So then you say, okay, where are some of the areas like police advisory? Wake County has a police advisory board. They sent out invitations for people to join and only 10 people came on board, 10 people. So they had to send an ad out, send another letter of invitation out. So we got 10 people or fewer that want to serve on this board that holds the police accountable. But we got thousands of people that want to come out and riot against what they perceive the police to be doing. So we need some of that energy for the riot, for some of the energy on the policies and the procedures and some of the oversight and accountability. So we need to, as Brother Musa was talking about education, we need to educate ourselves about the process, the political processes, and interject ourselves in them. They may not be what we want them to be now, but we have to commit to changing them from the inside. So you go, you find out where are the opportunities, you educate yourself. You go in and you begin where they are. In Wake County, they had a planning board that didn't have any citizen representation. The citizens went to the council members and said, listen, we don't want a bunch of planners and developers. We want regular citizens. They put regular citizens up there. This is how everything in America in politics is incremental. Even when we see a revolution on the outside, there's some things that went on with it behind the scenes. And this indeed works. And I know it works because I've tried it and been involved in it and done it. I'll just give you this brief story. I was working before I became a Muslim. I was a Christian pastor. I was working at a church and we needed some affordable housing. We knew about Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity was not building houses for our people in our side of town in Rocky Mount. So what did we do? We became involved in Habitat for Humanity. We got on the board of Habitat for Humanity. We ended up building a whole development in a cul-de-sac of houses. And some of the members of that church became owners of those houses. That's because we got a position on that board and held that board accountable and had a say-so in what happened. This is where the change is going to come at. This is where we have to work the effective change. It may not be attractive. There's not a lot of notoriety for it, but this is what's effective. And this will give us a sense of having a political impact and political efficacy, because we're going to have to change the institutions, because we have to be, we talked about the lion and the mouse example. The lion is the king of the jungle. But in order for the lion to be the king of the jungle, the lion knows his territory. He knows the ins and outs of his territory. He knows what's going on in his jungle. And so we have to know our territory. We have to know the ins and outs of it and educate ourselves on it. And then we have to go in and be the change and not just the stuff jingling in your pocket. And it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort, and it's going to take some commitment. It's easy to be a keyboard warrior, to put a post on Facebook, put a hashtag out there, get into a heated discussion with somebody on a chat on a post. But when it comes to showing up to go to a meeting and sitting in that meeting, even when you know the people might not want you there, but to sit there anyway. This is the courage, as Imam AbuTaleb talks about, is a time for courage and not for cowardice. All of us Black men, African-American men that are sitting on this panel today, if we didn't have courage, we wouldn't be there. Because we beat past the system that was designed to keep us from being where we are. And that's not arrogance, that's just a fact. Everywhere along the line, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1980. In 1980, they wrote on the bathroom stall that Glenn Silver is the stupid expletive. This was in 1980. While they had people that looked like me, they were cheering them on the basketball court. But in those of us that weren't on the basketball court that they competed against in the classroom were seen as, again, that other. But we have to take the mantle up and have the courage to go where it's uncomfortable, to do what's uncomfortable, to say what's uncomfortable, to be ostracized, to be there when they look at you that they don't want you in the room, but to disprove that. And this is the challenge that we face and that all of us face as Muslims, because now we double. I'm a Black man and I'm a Muslim. So they doubly don't want me there with my towel head or my rag head or whatever, all these other derogatory terms they want to call it. But we have to command and demand that respect. And this is the challenge that we have. We can talk some more in the future times about some of the specific ways that we can walk through and do that. We've gleaned a lot of information from the Industrial Areas Foundation on how to build these relationships. But the start of it all is right here, especially when we talk about racism. It's the elephant in the room that we need to address and we need to talk about it. And when we can have a decent conversation, a conversation about different perspectives and a conversation about how we can get past it. And all the things that have been said and all the contributions we made from our different perspectives is the way to do it. Because what we have to understand, and I'll turn it over to the Sheikh and Imams after this, but we go back and look at the Prophet Ibrahim, alayhi salam. When he gave the call, the azan, and Imam AbuTaleb, you've given several khutbahs about this, that there was nobody there. But he saw he saw and trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the growth that would come. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prayed for us, the ummah that would come, seeing it in the unseen world, even though it was not yet visible. Some of the things we're doing, I'm doing. I have a 1-year-old granddaughter. I don't want her to be sitting at a panel 50 years from now having this same discussion, because we have to move it. We may not be able to drive the car down the road, and we may not be able to, we can build the road, we can build the car, we can put the fuel in it, but then we can pass it on to the next generation to be able to drive it to the vision that we see it can get to. And that's a world where racism is eliminated, where even if the discussion is being had, it's being had at another level. We have moved the needle somewhat. And we have to be realistic and temper our idealism with some realism, that we can move it farther along. My mother took me to the cotton field when I was 3 years old, picking cotton. My mother scrubbed floors for people's houses that she had to go in the back door to. My mother had a 4th grade education, but see, she saw a better future for me. She died a couple of years ago, but she lived to see me doing things that she could only dream of doing. And so she had the courage, took a lot of things that from people, a lot of disrespect, a lot of humbling things, but she did it for the next generation. We have to keep that attitude alive, that we do what we do, not just for us, but for those who, inshallah, will come after us.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for that, man. Yeah, thank you for that. Alhamdulillah.
You supposed to jump in?
Go ahead, man.
I think we're doing our closings. Everybody's.
Okay.
You can jump in, talk about whatever you want.
Okay.
I planned for a 30-minute session, but subhanAllah, we're at 2 hours, and this is only the first of many. So whoever wants to take the lead can say whatever they want. And inshallah, Brother Musa, Ustad Musa will close us off with his final thoughts and then a dua, inshallah.
Okay. I wanted to say something in closing, if you don't mind. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. W.E.B. Du Bois, a Harvard-educated African-American activist in the 20th century, he made a comment and said that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. That meant that the issues that he had to deal with as a young man growing up in elementary school and so forth, and the racism that he faced, and what he saw during his time, he saw no end to it, and that it would go until the 20th century. That is a problem. That the issue of racism would continue to be a problem, and he was basically addressing that he didn't see a fair wage, or should I say, a living wage being given to, in particular, African Americans, the masses of African Americans. He didn't see equity in education, and he saw this development of the process of creating this mass incarceration, and he saw back then even a problem with health care, and of course the right to vote. These issues that I just mentioned are still alive and well, and the current crisis that we have with the coronavirus, there's a disproportionate number of particularly African Americans who are suffering and dying from this virus. So, and the mortality rate among African Americans is higher. So we still have a problem with race, and what we see happening on the streets of America, it definitely highlights that fact that racism still exists. He said the color line. Now, I'm gonna create some tension here because I think it's necessary. And if we're serious about what we're saying, doing to eliminate or improve the relationships between human beings on this planet, we have to be serious when we say that we're Muslims, and we have to be serious when we say that we are followers of the Tawhidi movement that was established by all the prophets of God. And the issue that they addressed was false worship. Imam Muhammad said that the worst oppression is false worship. And what we're talking about, the brothers and sisters, is the fact that nobody lives on this planet. The majority of people on this planet, they know subconsciously, they know that the image of God on this planet is that of a white person. That's the highest image of, or a thing that people can say that is supreme, is the most powerful being on planet. The picture of Isa alayhi salam that they say he is, he's picked it up as God. White supremacy has its roots in that. And until we as Muslims, so in a sophisticated and an intellectual and a scientific way, address the issue of that, racism and white supremacy will always exist. Because as long as a white person's image is in God, is in the world as the deity of God, then they can say that I'm a member of that because of that race. God, they can subconsciously say that I'm a part of God's family. But people who are not of that color subconsciously would say, I'm not a part of that. And so this is an issue that I think that we should think about, at least put under our thinking caps when we think about Tawheed. We need to know the impact. Imam Salahuddin wrote a good book about bridging the divide between African American and immigrant Muslims, and he used as his basis of his study the concept of Tawheed is the principle that will bring us together if we look at it from not just the idea that it gives us the understanding of how we should see Allah, but in how, what is the impact of Tawheed in politics? What's the impact of Tawheed in economics? What's the impact of Tawheed in the social life? What impact does that concept have in the creation? So we need to look at that, because I think in that we will get to the root of the problems in the economy, the problems in the social setup, in the healthcare, everything. If we look at that, because this is what our deen is based on, the concept of Tawheed, and it has tremendous implications in how it impacts all aspects of life on this planet. And until we have the courage that Prophet Ibrahim had, and the the courage that Isa alayhi salam had, Moses, Noah, and our dear Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, we have to stand up with the same courage, not to offend people, but to do it in a most sophisticated way, and give the clear arguments, not offending people, and don't be afraid to speak it in a way that won't hurt people or make people feel pushed away, but to say it in a way that they can relate to it and actually see it happening, the impact of a false worship impacting the concept of racism, etc. So that's what I wanted to end with.
Thank you, brother, man. I just want to tell a little quick story, taking all of this and putting it together, working it all out, knowing that blend is never a quick fix. It doesn't happen like that. It takes time. And it's the story of the foolish old man in the mountain. This old man had two mountains blocking his view. And so he decided to get up and he said, I'm going to work, and I'm going to work hard to remove that which is blocking my view. And every morning he would get up with his shovel and dig and dig and dig. And people used to come by, oh, look at that foolish old man. Look at that foolish old man. He think he can remove that mountain. He just kept digging and digging and digging. And when someone came to him to ask him about it, he said, I'm going to dig, and I'm going to continue to dig. And if it's not removed, I'll just dig until I die. And then my children will dig and dig and dig, and they will dig until they die if it's not removed. And they will continue to dig, and all the rest of them will continue to dig and continue to dig until this, which is blocking my view, is removed. And it says that Allah saw this work of this man, and he sent the angels down to remove the mountains, and the mountains were eventually removed. In that little story, it kind of captures the thing, because it's about work. You know, oftentimes people don't want to do the work, especially today. People don't have time to do all this work. It says not do more work, is to do less work, right? To do it in a better way. We have to work at this thing, continue to work at this thing. And as we move along, it'll get better, starting with ourselves, starting with our own heart, our own mind, our own thoughts, in our own communities, in our own homes, and then it begins to go out. So I believe that we've made some good steps, that we have a good team of people working here. I think we can do it. I really believe that we can. And the attitude that some of us have, and on this list right here, in this group right here that we're talking right now, I'm the oldest. All right, I'm the oldest, and I'm just about 70. Let me say this to you. The spirit that we have, and I'm saying this to you now, the spirit that we have, I don't know, man, your spirit don't seem to age. You might get old enough, but the spirit is still there. My body won't make me do some of the things I want to do. But the idea is that we will not move from, we will not quit our posts. We will not quit our posts until we're properly relieved. Right. And the spirit that we have is that we're only properly relieved when we die. So that means we have to keep working at this. So again, I thank you all for allowing us to be on this panel, in this platform, and I pray Allah that we continue to do this work. May Allah continue to bless all of us. Ameen.
SubhanAllah, SubhanAllah. Before Brother Musa gives his, or before Imam Talib, I don't know what order we're in, I just want to briefly close with going back to Imam AbuTaleb's challenge. As we're looking in our circles and in our phones to make it more diverse, I want to also make sure that we reach to other generations. Not obviously just my generation, generations between us, but generations specifically younger than myself, who may be probably the youngest on the call. One of the things, and to speak to me, speaking to myself first, one of the things that I've seen in working in the school system, obviously as unbiased as a person I can be, I always do like to try to identify who is Muslim and who is not Muslim. Obviously I have a closer connection to those people. There have been several times in my work that I've seen a student that will come by me many times and I wouldn't even know that they were Muslim until after the fact. There's one specific student who is, I think he would identify as African American. His parents are from Africa, from I believe West Africa. And he used to get in a lot of trouble. He was probably the worst student. Millbrook at the time had about 3,000 students. He was number 1 or 2 on the discipline list. Wow. I dealt with him a lot, one-on-one, tried to talk sense into this kid, and it seemed like it was never getting through. The entire time that I was dealing with him, I had no idea that he was Muslim. I didn't find out he was Muslim until after he got out, I think he ended up going to a different high school. He reached out to me on Twitter recently, and he said, Rise, which I'm known as my artist name, he said, man, I need to get closer to the deen. I never knew that it would keep you so grounded and it would keep you so focused, even in the midst of, everything that goes on in this world. He said, and I started seeing it, I went to prison. I've been in the streets, and I started noticing that no matter where I went, it was always the Muslim brother, that remained grounded and focused no matter what, no matter what. So again, I do want to make sure that I speak up for those that don't feel that genuine connection to Islam growing up that I felt. I grew up around a whole lot of Muslims. My mother and father and their peers worked to establish Islam in the tri-state area between New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania, but specifically Philadelphia. And they had a lot of kids. So we grew up with a lot of inherited cousins. And anytime we moved with a lot of people. So we never joined gangs. We never had things like that, but we had a lot of Muslims, and we garnered a lot of respect by the way we carried ourselves, as such. And I don't see that in the generations that's coming after me. And I blame myself, but I also blame I might create some enemies, but I blame some of you all on this call as well and your generations, because our ways of thinking were judgmental to the generations that came after us, that did things and said things and acted and reacted in ways that we couldn't understand or identify with at the time. And we judged them. And because we judged them, sometimes we kept ourselves away from them. Awesome. We probably need to now extend that challenge to have mercy, to have forgiveness. I'm sorry that my generation spends a lot of time behind the keyboard, but guess what? They're talking to a lot of people. Their platform is very big. When they make a post and there's people discussing under that post, they might be reaching more people than some of us have ever talked to in our life. That's right. So we do need to identify with these individuals, include them in our circles, include them in our spaces, and may Allah purify all of our intentions. And lastly, this last thing I want to say, I promise. Speaking again for myself, I'm not an imam. I'm not an ustad. I'm not of any title, I guess, to be. I am a citizen in this country. I am a member of this community. I happen to be a musician, alhamdulillah. I happen to be a mentor, alhamdulillah. we also need to be included into the spaces that sometimes more reputable people are reached out to. We wish to be included in your spaces and included in your circles and being brought to the table, alhamdulillah, like I'm being brought to today. But I'm one of millions of people who are actively in the community, on the ground, in people's ears, in people's faces, and they need to be included in these spaces. SubhanAllah, shukran for everything that you all have done and shared with us.
Thank you, brother.
Musa.
Alhamdulillah. Imam AbuTaleb, are you going to say some closing words, or you?
Sure, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan to everyone, alhamdulillah, for this enlightening discussion, and inshallah one among many to come, and many that have passed, and many that need to occur. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the strength, inshallah, as Ustaz Musa will lead us in salat, to continue to be together and to continue to work on this. I want to share a very brief hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a point of action as we think of the important things we'll continue to do. The Prophet ﷺ speaks of some dua and supplication he made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He asked Allah on behalf of his ummah that they not be destroyed by a plague or disease, and Allah granted him that. Then he asked that they not be destroyed by an enemy from outside, and Allah granted him that. And the hadith closes that he asked Allah that he not make the hatred and enmity among Muslims severe between one another. And Allah in his wisdom did not grant him that dua. So a very important thing as we work and act on this massive undertaking that requires the best and the brightest and many talents and has a lot of different. So we've been learning today about actions from individually in our hearts, from spiritual actions, from education, from advocacy, from political engagement, and a lot of other important things, including storytelling and sharing the information. It is a challenge that I hope and challenge myself first and foremost and everyone else to live up to give space and allow the breadth of talent to engage in this important work. Sometimes we become over passionate about our own institutions, our own organizations, our own opinions. And a measure of our commitment to the cause and the importance of what we've learned today is the openness of our heart to engage with others and to see that this problem is much larger than one individual or one organization. One of the most impactful pieces of advice that I ever received in my life from a mentor was a person that likened our institutions, our letters, our organizations to vehicles. Those vehicles are ultimately taking us to a destination that is success, inshallah, in this life and the next, to Jannah, for Allah to be well pleased with what we did in this world. When we become too passionate about our vehicle, sometimes we miss a faster way to get there or a perfect partner along the way. So I hope, inshallah, that the brotherhood and sisterhood that I feel on this panel for people that I love and respect for the sake of Allah, and I pray that Allah makes this a source of benefit for us on the Day of Judgment, and a community whose comments, alhamdulillah, and engagement are appreciated as well. Allah expand our hearts and elevate us spiritually to encompass one another, not only when we agree, but at times when we have well-meaning disagreements, not about the fundamentals of what we talked today, but about the best way to get there, the best place to get there. And that ultimately, this problem is a problem that many generations past have suffered for and sacrificed for, and the turn has come to us to do our part, each of us in our lane and our capacity. I pray to Allah that together we're given the ability to affect positive change, and particularly in our hearts and our households and in our locality, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Ustaz Musa, over to you.
So inshallah ta'ala, I just want to close out with thanking all of the brothers and sisters on the panel discussion, Sister Letha and the Sister what's her name? Rhonda Muhammad. I can see that they posted many chats that are very beneficial for our discussion. In my closing, I would just like to give some appreciation to the suggestion for political engagement. hard work, getting involved, being more pragmatic, because I really think, in essence, that the attitudes and the biases of racism will probably never go away in individuals. And unfortunately, we kind of like see a lot of attention in the media being specifically focused on the individuals changing their attitudes and changing their perspective, which is very important. And, we mentioned, Imam AbuTaleb mentioned the struggle, within our hearts to make sure that we change our own perspective and using Tawheed as a guiding point. All of these things are well understood and important. But one of the things that I really would like to challenge all of us to do is to realize that there's not a lot of emphasis being put on the institutionalized, systematic injustice that we see amongst us. I believe that this is what is fueling people all over the country. They're looking at this benign neglect. They're looking at a government, a system that is not taking the responsibility on putting individual biases and racist actions and violations in check. So, this idea of political engagement, this is something that I think has to come to the forefront. If we're truly understanding the problem that we're facing, then it's an obligation that we get involved, that we have to get involved, and we have to understand the importance of organizing ourselves. This is what the American experience is all about. We can look at this history and we understand that you have to work for your advancement. United States has never given anyone anything except that they fought for it, protested for it in order for them to get it and secure it. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and guide us. I just want to mention one small saying of Martin Luther King, because it becomes amazing that you see these protests are occurring throughout the United States. And one of the sayings of Martin Luther King, he said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
That's right.
You see, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And that saying that he expressed so many years ago, we can see people are just getting very tired of the same injustice. And I think we all have to join together and get involved. So inshallah, I would just like to close out with the dua and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Jazakallah khair for everyone joining us. We pray inshallah that we can continue on some other platforms, organizing and having some other detailed discussions on how we can get involved. Thank you all for joining us, and pray that we can continue later.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Praise be to Allah.
Alhamdulillah. Very good. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alhamdulillah.